Before you start ripping out boilers or selling up, we think it's time to take a breath. There's been a lot of noise and a fair bit of panic about rising energy efficiency requirements. Anything E and above is currently rentable. Basically what they're saying is that they're going to raise that minimum EPC up to a C level.
You're making me panic a little bit.
If you as a landlord are going to have to spend £15,000 on bringing that up to a C rating, you are going to be waiting decades for that £15,000 to come back to you. And what's going to happen then? It's simple maths, isn't it? We have a growing population and we're not building enough homes. So we are at an imbalance.
How long is it going to take to repay 15 grand? Do the maths. It's just not worth it. Not everyone can or wants to buy their own home. What about the people who can't buy? What about the people who need to rent? What about the people that are long-term renters in life? What are they going to do?
We could get very political about all of this. We're not going to, but... Hey UK property people, we'd love to have you join us at This Property Life Networking. It's a no-guru friendly community. Our network gets a private WhatsApp group for daily advice and deal sharing, monthly online networking with live market updates and in-person events every year. Hit the link in the description below, join today and start building real connections with active property investors. In this episode of This Property Life, Nick and I dive into one of the hot topics in property right now, EPC changes and what they really mean for landlords, investors and tenants. There's been a lot of noise and a fair bit of panic about rising energy efficiency requirements, the cost of upgrades, and whether certain properties will even be rentable in the future. But before you start ripping out boilers or selling up, we think it's time to take a breath. We're going to break down what's actually confirmed and what's still just speculation, the likely timelines for implementation, how lenders and landlords are reacting, and the practical steps you can take now without overspending. So if you're worried about the EPC changes and wondering what to do next, this episode will give you clarity and confidence to plan strategically rather than react out of fear. Nick, hi, and how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Yes, not too bad. But you're making me panic a little bit.
Oh
Well, actually
no,
not.
don't be panicking. So, I
No, I'm
mean,
not
we're
panicking.
going to be talking about England and Wales in this particular episode. Obviously, you have a lot of stock up in Scotland, and it's even more complex up there.
It is more complex in Scotland. And, I talked to a lot of investors up here who are actually panicking about Scotland because I think England and Wales have rode back quite a bit on what they were originally proposing, whereas Scotland have kind of like committed so far. And it's a little bit more certain, I think, in
Okay.
Scotland as what's going to happen and what it means.
So
But
I think
still,
then we should do a separate podcast for our Scottish listeners and investors so that we
yeah,
can give that the time that it really requires.
yeah, definitely, yeah. It's a little bit more in depth, but there's also some positives. Always remember, it's not all negative. There's always positives.
There always is. So we're going to talk about England and Wales, what's going on with the EPC rules. I think, well, the main thing, as I sort of said, is not to panic really, because it is going to be one of those where nothing is actually confirmed yet. So we are coming up towards autumn of 2025. When did we first start talking about EPC changes, Nick? We were just trying to think of that offline, weren't we?
Yeah, I reckon it was probably 21, 22. I would say I first started hearing about it.
Yeah.
That something was brewing.
Yeah, and I think everyone started panicking then. Some people exited the market. You know, what we're currently sitting at is that if you have a property and it has an EPC rating of E, this is in England and Wales, then you're allowed to rent it out. So anything E and above is currently rentable. Basically, what they're saying is that they're going to raise that minimum EPC up to a C level. And that is going to be, at the moment, they're saying new tenancies 2028 will have to have a C, and all tenancies from 2030 will have to have a C. If you're loving this episode, don't just listen, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss our weekly property chats, deal breakdowns, and market updates. It takes a couple of seconds, it's free, and it helps us bring you even better guests and property chat.
I was going to say, should we just kind of break down for anyone kind of new into property? Should we just do a bit of terminology and just so that everyone understands what we're talking about? So EPC meaning energy performance certificate. And this is basically, as it sounds, the energy performance of your house. When you're renting a house out, you need to have an EPC done. Currently, Sarah, they last for 10 years, is
10
it?
years, yep. So if you are renting it out, if you're selling a property, you will always have to have a current EPC.
Yeah. And so that would be an energy performance contractor would come out and they would assess your property for its energy performance. So look at things like windows, the windows double glazed, are they fitted properly? Insulation, heat retention, all these kinds of things is what they will look at. So, if you're buying an older property that hasn't really been looked after, it's probably going to be quite low rating. But naturally, as you would be renovating that property, you would probably be doing things like upgrading the windows and probably just doing that and upgrading a boiler would probably bring it into rentable condition.
Yeah, and assessors will often only just go by what they can see. So one of my top tips has been this for many years now. If you are doing a refurb, especially if it's a back to brick one, get your EPC assessor in at the beginning of the project. Tell him what you're going to be doing. Ask him when he needs to come back to be able to prove what you've done on the inside of the building fabric. All our HMOs, we've the guy back to say, look, here's all the insulation going in. He can then evidence it in his audit trail. So that's a top tip just generally. And I think it's even more important at the moment if you are looking to do any development work, because there are assessors that will say, I can't see that you've put insulation in here. Therefore, it doesn't exist.
Take photos of everything.
Yeah. But they'll
Advice as
often
well.
want to see it with their own eyes and they take their photos. So it's costs, 60, 70 quid nowadays to get an EPC visit done. And, I'm on first name terms with my EPC assessor. So, just make sure that you build a relationship with someone who will work with you to get your refurbs done to the best today's standard. I think that's the thing, isn't it? The assessment is on today at the moment. So at the moment, gas central heating rates way better than electric. The electric storage heaters are what the EPC assessment is modelled on. Whereas if people are putting electric in nowadays, they're not tending to do storage heaters because they're quite old and antiquated. They're putting in new, better electric heaters, but they're just not in an assessment. The assessor can't even rate them properly because he's got nothing to tick against.
Behind the curve, again, this is often the case of these things are behind the curve, and we have electric boilers. We use them as well. So, and that again, that wouldn't even register. In fact, we got and this is different, it's a commercial, but in a hotel, because we have electric boilers, we got rated, well down because they just couldn't, there wasn't an option, even though that was part of the planning and building control process was to put electric in. Anyway, so yeah, they are a little bit behind the curve. So we need to be ahead of the curve, I think, is what we're saying.
Yes, and the smart money is on if you have properties that are currently around a D or your property is already a C on the current assessment system. The smart money is to say, if you're D, do what you can now to get it to the C. So get an EPC assessor in to say what has to happen to this property to get it to C, and then choose the items that are most cost efficient, get it to your C, and at some point during 2026, and I would say sort of middle to late 26, get a new EPC in, get it done, get it rated at C, because there is likely to be some grandfather rights to our ratings at the moment. How long they'll last, no one knows. But generally, when these things come through, there's always a grandfather right.
And what does that mean, Sarah, grandfather right for
It
anyone?
basically means that you have the right to hold on to that rating for a certain time period, which will, basically just allow you to piggyback off of the current rating into the new rating.
So it kind of kicks the problem down the road a little bit.
Kicks the problem down the road. But you know what? That's
It makes it a
okay.
tomorrow problem, not a today problem.
Yes, but that's okay because things change all the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And, better to be prepared, isn't it, than not. So
But see,
whilst we don't know what the structure is, let's do what we can.
and I'm saying that's a good thing to kick something down the road because, a change of government could come in and it could row back on this.
We've had a lot of chat from Reform at the moment, and they are really building a steam. Lots of Tory MPs are, today, even just in the news, another Tory MP had deflected to Reform. If Reform get in the next government, which I think is a likelihood.
We won't get political, but it could happen, and we, as investors, we've got to be aware of these things, and we've got to be thinking about, what could happen. So yeah, I think there's a reason, but better than reasonable chance. Yeah.
I think there is, and they are not on the climate change agenda. I think that they will cut pretty much anything to do with climate change and focus on what they have as their priorities. So again, we just don't know what's going to happen. So don't panic, Mr. Mannering, I think, isn't it?
I think that is the key message is, I've heard through the grapevine, I've also talked directly to a few investors. This is mainly up here in Scotland, where it is a little bit more certain. But I even say, I've had people saying, I'm just selling. These people with quite sizable portfolios, they're just saying, I'm just getting out, enough now. you know. So yeah, and I think that's going to have major repercussions over the kind of medium and longer term, which
Yeah.
we'll get to. We can discuss that and discuss, maybe some opportunities.
Yeah. So let's have a look at what the changes are. So we've said it's currently an E, it's going to raise to a C, 2028 for new tenancies, 2030 for all tenancies. But there's going to be a new methodology. So we've spoken about how at the moment we can't even cope with electric heating in a building. I think in England and Wales at the moment, it's going to be about heat retention. So that's the fabric of a building, as well as the system that you put in and the cost to run and its carbon footprint. So we are at the moment, gas central heating is the thing that gives the best EPC, but we know that they are trying to phase out gas central heating in favour of heat pumps. And I think hydrogen's going to be playing a part in this as well, but we just don't know what that looks like at the moment.
In Scotland, similar. They're moving to the fabric idea. It's the fabric of the building, and it's about how clean is the energy, and it's about heat. Well, they actually refer to it as clean heat.
Yeah.
So how clean is the heat, and how well is it retained?
Yeah. So I think EPC started as a cost to run for tenants. It's moving to a clean energy, carbon footprint aspect. But as we said, if reform get in,
Net zero is gone. It's
I
just gone.
believe that as well. I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs of any of this, but I think that that's probably a fact. The methodology is going to change. We expect that to be late 2026, that we might get an inkling as to what that new EPC system is. They're saying late 26. I honestly, it's going to be pushed down the line. We've got so
Can't
much
see it.
going on politically that I don't think that this is going to come in.
Can't see it happening that soon. There will be a lot of kickback because, as usual, again, without getting political, because all governments are the same, it's not one or the other, I think. They just haven't really thought this through at all. It probably comes from a good place, and I do believe that they're trying to do a good thing, but they really haven't thought through the real detail of what they're proposing and what it might mean in the kinds of communities and kind of areas where professional investors tend to operate.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, I mean, well, let's move on to the third thing here. So that's the cost cap and the exemptions. So at the moment, they are talking about a 15 grand minimum spend per property to get it up to the required rating. So
And
that
maximum,
means,
you say minimum or maximum there, Sarah? Sorry.
sorry,
Yeah,
maximum
I thought you
spend.
said, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
God,
just
minimum, that would be everyone's out.
yeah.
Maximum spend, which basically means that if it's going to cost you more than 15,000 to get your property to the rating that's required, which is a C, then it's not going to happen. Okay, so what that really means is two things. If you can't get there with that maximum spend of 15,000, then you're stuck with a lower rating and tenants might not want to move into your property. Now, in reality, we have a supply and demand problem. So there's not enough supply and there's too much demand. So I don't think actually that will really have much of an effect.
But also, this is a prime example where they haven't really thought it through. Because if you put a blanket 15K max across England and Wales, it's going to cost significantly different amount
Across the regions.
to improve a house in the Welsh valleys than it is in Knightsbridge in London,
Yes. Call out
right?
fee in Knightsbridge will be 15 grand,
Yeah.
let alone
Or
actually
even
doing the
or
work.
even not even say you say Knightsbridge, I mean, do a suburb of London, like somewhere like where I grew up in Harrow in London, right?
Yeah.
It's you're not gonna be able to do much for 15 grand in anywhere in London and South East. So again, a blanket kind of everywhere in England and Wales, 15 grand max is again just not thought through at all.
Yeah. And I
Nobody
think the
said.
other unintended consequence of this, and I've touched on this in previous podcasts, is that for areas in England and Wales where rents are low. So we know rents have always gone up and they are, quite high at the moment, but there are parts of the Northeast where you can still get property, 3-bed property for £570 per month. Those properties are typically terraced housing of an old stock, where if you as a landlord, are going to have to spend £15,000 on bringing that up to a C rating, you are going to be waiting decades for that 15,000 to come back to you. And what's going to happen then?
What are people likely to do in those kinds of areas, or landlords, or the amateur landlords, or even some professional landlords who have just been constantly hammered by these successive governments, and that is both Conservatives and Labour governments, hammered over the last 10, 15 years. Just what's the point? There's no point having this house that nets me after costs 150, 200 quid a month. How long is it going to take to repay 15 grand? Do the maths. It's just not worth it. So yeah, I think there's going to be a big problem. And that means is that a lot of that housing stock, if the landlords just sell and get out, which is what the government and a lot of the general population who don't really understand what's going on either think is a good thing. Suddenly, all these rental stock is gone from the market, snapped up by first-time buyers. Brilliant. What about the people who can't buy? What about the people who need to rent? What about the people that are long-term renters in life because, for whatever reason, they're not in a position to ever buy a property? And that's okay. And they're quite happy with that. What are they going to do?
Yeah, exactly. It's simple maths, isn't it? We have a growing population through, birth rate to a small extent, but also with net migration. And we are an island and we're not building enough homes because of bureaucracy and just general silliness in the government. But we've had decades of not building enough homes, but we've had decades of population growth. So we are at an imbalance. So people could say, yeah, all landlords should exit the market and people should be allowed to buy them homes. There's not enough.
Is they not enough? And not everyone can or
And
wants to buy their own home.
yeah,
It's too simplistic a view, and by people who don't understand what's actually going on in the housing market in the UK. And not just, you can't look at a housing market. There's thousands of micro markets. If I think of some of the areas where I invest, what are the percentage of homeowners to renters? It's probably 70-30 in favor of renters. And that's okay. And they're quite happy with that. And that's what they do. They rent because they're just not in a position to buy and a lot of people don't actually want to.
yeah, you're right. And I think, we could get very political about all of this. We're not going to, but my message would be EPC legislation. Yes, something will probably change, but we don't actually know when. If reform get in, it might not change. So don't panic about something that isn't even confirmed. The devil is always in the detail. We don't have, it's not gone anywhere yet. We just are surmising about things that could happen. So all I would say to you is if you're on a C or a D, which, I think most people since the EPC came into an E will be, get up to a C, get your EPC done in 2026 and have, hopefully some sort of grandfather rights. Wait then to see what the new methodology is, what the new timeline is, and what the cost cap and exemptions will be before you actually start to make any major decisions. And as always, the unintended consequence of all this manipulation is that the poor tenant will always be the losing party. That's my take on it all.
And for those professional landlords that can see the long-term picture, and property investment is a long-term picture. It's not a quick in and out. It's to build wealth over time. I think the long-term prospects, just because I see successive things the governments are doing, and it's just like the long-term prospects for the private rented sector is a really strong case. I look at what's happened in Scotland recently, where they tried to bring in rent caps. It resulted in literally a 30% uplift in rents almost overnight when they released it, because it forced a lot of people out. Suddenly there's not enough properties. Simple supply and demand. Always go back to macroeconomics, supply and demand, not build enough houses, got more people needing or wanting to rent. It's pretty basic economics.
Yeah.
So my view is always stick it out, deal with the short term with an eye always on the long term and where, your property portfolio is going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Nick raises a really good point there, and it's good to end on a piece of optimism as well, because this is the long term. And Nick is completely right. Those that stick with this and all the other little changes that are happening in the market, you will really thank yourself in 5 to 10 years' time. Amazing. I think let's do another podcast for Scotland, Nick.
There's some more detail around Scotland. It is more likely to be set in stone. Not yet, but it is. So we will do an update on that. And also, again, we'll look at some positive, look at some way that if it does come in, and there are things like grants that are going to be available, and also certain types of housing stock are more affected than others. So we'll do a deeper dive into Scotland for those of us who invest up there.
Stay tuned for that one. Thank you very much.